We'll then turn to our witnesses, who we thank for being with us today. Each witness will have, if you would summarize your remarks in 5 minutes, that would leave more time for questions and answers. Each senator will have 5 minutes, and we'll try to keep the questions and answers for each senator at 5 minutes so everyone can have a chance to participate. I'd like to begin today by thanking Senator Murray. She offered some kind words for me at our hearing on Tuesday. Let me say something about her. 4 years ago, she and I received the National Education Association's Friend of Education Award. It was the first time in 30 years the NEA had awarded that award to a Republican, but it was the second time in 4 years that they'd awarded it to Senator Murray. So we would seem like an unlikely pair. But there's a little secret to our relationship. Senator Murray was a preschool teacher, and my mother had a kindergarten in our backyard where she had 25 3- and 4-year-olds in the morning and 25 5-year-olds in the afternoon for 30 years. And I was there for almost every year until I was 6. So Senator Murray and I found a lot of common ground in what you learn in preschool, which was the childhood lesson of play well together. An indispensable part of our success has been Staff Director Evan Schatz and David Cleary, my staff director, as well as other members of the Murray staff and the Alexander staff who've also learned to work well together and made it easier for us to succeed. Our staff affectionately calls them the Murrays. The laws that we've passed in this committee over the past 6 years, when I've been chairman, she's been the ranking member, wouldn't have happened without Senator Murray, whose leadership and effectiveness helped yield, for example, the Every Student Succeeds Act. President Obama called that a Christmas miracle. It affects 100,000 public schools and 50 million children. Or the 21st Century Cures Act. Senator McConnell called that, which passed in 2016, the most important law of the entire Congress, speeding up life-saving cures for diseases from Alzheimer's to cancer to flu. It's been helpful in driving research for COVID-19. Then there's the Opioid Response Crisis Act of 2018 and the Future Act of last year, when we began the process of simplifying the dreaded FAFSA by law and permanently funded historically black colleges, a goal for a long time. And there have been many more, including the Perkins Law and other important laws. Senator Murray has been extraordinarily effective, partly because she's a member of the Democratic leadership, and she commands great respect on her side of the aisle. But she also knows how to create an environment in which bills can become law, which requires bipartisan action. For example, when she and I first began the work on fixing No Child Left Behind, she said that what we should do is write the bill together. Well, that hadn't been my plan, but I took her advice. Turned out to be good advice, and we got a result that not many people thought we would get. That bill had many complicated and contentious issues. There were crocodiles at every part of the pond. But Senator Murray helped find creative ways to conquer those challenges and proceed to the finish. One of the most special times for me in my 18 years in the Senate was on April 16, 2015, when we called the roll on the Every Student Succeed Act. And this committee, of so many different points of view, every single senator voted yes to recommend that bill to the Senate. That type of bipartisan support never would have happened without Patty Murray. We've had some disappointments. We've certainly had some differences of opinion, but Senator Murray's always been willing to sit down and try to find a path forward, even on the most contentious issues. I often say it's hard to get to the United States Senate. It's hard to stay here, and while you're here, you might as well try to accomplish something good for the country. Senator Murray's that kind of senator, the kind that's here to get something done. And Americans are fortunate that the result has been new laws to tackle the opioid crisis, spur new cures for diseases, to make it easier to attend and afford college, and to help 50 million children in 100,000 public schools. So I thank her for her friendship, for her partnership, and her leadership on some of the most important issues of our time. And now let's turn our attention to one of those important issues, and it is this. 20 million students and their families are in the middle of what has to be the strangest first semester of college in at least a century. Almost everything has changed for students, except one thing. Students still have to answer 108 questions on the dreaded FAFSA form, the federal aid application for Pell Grants and student loans to help go to college. For years now, I've carried around the FAFSA as a prop to make the case for simplifying it. But it's no joke, especially this year. Many students are questioning their investment in a college education at a time when many classes are only offering online courses. Many of low-income students who would benefit most economically from college long-term are putting it off altogether. There was already an 8% drop in the number of Black undergraduate students enrolled in summer sessions compared with last summer's enrollment, according to the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. The president of Southwest Tennessee Community College in Memphis, a mostly minority community college, told me a few years ago that he loses 1,500 students a semester because of the complexity of filling out the FAFSA. Imagine how much less motivated anyone is to fill out those 108 FAFSA questions this year. This is a form that is especially difficult for students who are homeless, who are in foster care, who are living with grandparents. It's hard for them to complete it. Homeless students have to prove they're homeless. Foster care students may not have access to all the information required to complete the FAFSA, and students living with their grandparents often are still dependent on their parents, and obtaining information from their parents may be difficult. These are the very students federal aid is meant to help, and it's exactly the kind of economy in which a college education proves its value. It's not that Senator Murray and I and others haven't been trying to help fix the FAFSA. When 4 of today's witnesses appeared before this committee almost 7 years ago, they universally agreed that the FAFSA was an obstacle to students attending college. They said we could award Pell Grants using just 2 simple variables, family size and income. Senator Bennett and I then had the same reaction. Well, if there's that much agreement on how to make it easier for 20 million families to apply for federal aid, why don't we just do it? So Senator Bennett and I set out to turn the lengthy FAFSA into a postcard. The result was the FAST Act. Senator Murray and I then worked with the Obama administration to allow students to fill out the FAFSA using their tax information from 2 years before they enroll in college, instead of 1. So they could file in the fall rather than having to wait until spring. The Trump administration has created an app so students and families can file the FAFSA on their cell phones or tablets. The Future Act, which Senator Murray and I sponsored, and which became law last year, reduced the FAFSA by up to 22 questions and eliminated the bureaucratic nightmare created by requiring students to give the federal government the same information twice and then to try to catch them in making a mistake. Stopping the federal government from asking for your tax information twice, once for the IRS and then once for the Education Department, also helps prevent most applicants from being selected by the Department of Education for income verification caused by mistakes, which many parents and counselors have told me is a bigger burden than filling out the 108 questions in the first place. So today we've got a piece of legislation that would finish the job. It has broad bipartisan support. It's based on recommendations that 4 of today's witnesses gave us nearly 7 years ago at a hearing before this committee. Here's what I mean when I say it's time to finish the FAFSA. The bipartisan legislation Senator Jones and I have proposed would reduce the total questions on the FAFSA from 108 to no more than 33. So let me give you an example of the difference, if I can hold it up. This is the 108 questions. This is the 33 question form that would make the difference if we can enact it this year. That's the first thing it would do. Second, it would end the Department of Education's lengthy financial data verification process by removing unnecessary financial questions and instead using only the financial data that will come directly from the IRS starting in 2023-24 school year, a change that Congress made in the Future Act, which passed last year and which I just mentioned. 3, it will continue to collect and provide states and colleges with the information they need to determine state and institutional aid. The first legislation that Senator Bennett and I worked on caused some problems for states, and we've worked with states and, and counselors to address those problems. 4, it would create a simple Pell Grant eligibility formula so that middle and high school students and anyone interested in applying for aid will know how much Pell Grant money they have to go to college. 5, it does something else, something that Senator Murray has been working on for 20 years, that makes it easier for students who are homeless, students in the foster system, or students who are not in touch with their parents. Our bill allows these students to apply for aid as independent students, making the application process for them much simpler. As a result of these changes, Congress would immediately enable more students to receive Pell Grants and many more to receive the maximum Pell Grant. An additional 420,000 students would qualify for Pell Grants each year if this bill passed, according to the Congressional Budget Office. An additional 1.6 million students would qualify to receive the maximum Pell Grant award each year. Students from single-parent families would benefit more from Pell Grants because the formula would account for the greatest needs of these families. And in addition to Senator Murray, much of this work has been done by Senator Bennett, Senator Jones, who's a member of this committee, and others who have helped with the work include Senator Booker, Senator Burr of this committee, Senator Collins of this committee, Senator King, and former Senator Isaacson. During these last several years, we've worked carefully with various organizations to make sure our proposals don't cause any unexpected problems, and as a result, we have the support of the National Association for Student Aid Administrators, the National College Attainment Network, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Organization, Schoolhouse Connections, National Association of State Student Grant Aid Programs, each of the regional higher education compacts. In conclusion, after nearly 7 years of work on these issues, it all boils down to this. It makes no sense to make it this complicated to apply for federal aid for college. It makes no sense to discourage the very students Congress wants to encourage to attend college and benefit from federal financial aid. In Tennessee, former Governor Bill Haslam created the Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect programs to provide 2 years of free community college to any Tennessean without a degree. All they have to do is fill out the FAFSA. Yet Governor Haslam told me that the FAFSA is the single biggest barrier to helping more Tennesseans take advantage of the opportunity for 2 free years of higher education. The right time to finish the job is now, a time when college students and their families are under so much pressure, facing so much uncertainty, especially homeless students, students in foster care, and those living with grandparents. I hope we can pass bipartisan legislation to do so by the end of this year. I will now recognize Senator Murray for her opening statement.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me just say thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your very kind opening remarks about me. I appreciate it so much. And if I'm not mistaken, this is your last scheduled education hearing as Help Chairman. So I will say today, thank you for all your contributions to higher education. As I said earlier this week, as a former governor, president of the University of Tennessee, secretary of education, this committee and our entire country, everyone has really benefited from your expertise and your experience. And I will say what I said again Tuesday, we all owe you a debt of gratitude and really, really appreciate all your work. You know, throughout our time together on HELP, we've been able to pass the Future Act to permanently fund our nation's HBCUs. We updated our nation's career and technical education programs and worked together with Senator Blunt to restore the year-round Pell Grant, just to name a few in higher education. So again, thank you so much for all of your contributions. And of course, today we are discussing an issue near and dear to your heart, where you already have an impressive legacy, and that is FAFSA simplification. I'm proud of the steps that we have taken to improve the FAFSA for students across the country. From our work in 2015 with the Obama administration to allow students to fill out the FAFSA earlier and with more accurate financial information, to our work last year on the Future Act, which will streamline the process to help students securely use the tax information already on file with the federal government. This is an issue where we have repeatedly been able to find common ground and get things done. And Mr. Chairman, your leadership on this issue has already made the FAFSA much easier to navigate, but of course we both agree there is more work to be done. The ongoing pandemic is also having a profound economic impact on families across the country, and we are already seeing students are facing unprecedented struggles when it comes to paying for college. The FAFSA must be a tool that expands access to higher education, not a barrier that prevents qualified students from getting the financial aid they need to go to college. And that means we need to build on the valuable work that's been done to make FAFSA easier to navigate by making sure that students experiencing homelessness, students in foster care, and students whose families have low incomes can successfully get access to the Pell Grants available to them. Because right now it's students that need our help the most who are facing the biggest burdens in getting financial aid. Those students don't often have the resources to navigate the college financial aid process, and they struggle without access to college counselors or other support, and many times without dependable internet or access to a computer. So instead of forcing them to jump through unnecessary hoops, we need to do everything we can to make their lives easier, like making the verification process where students have to confirm information on the FAFSA for their schools less of a burden, especially for families with low incomes. Determining Pell Grants based on the federal poverty level so more students and families can easily know the amount of help they will receive, and fully implementing the Future Act as soon as possible. And we can't stop there, by the way. We also need to get serious about connecting these students to more than just Pell Grants. And we must work to ensure that students don't miss out on state and federal support programs they may be eligible for that could help them afford food and housing and childcare. The FAFSA is just the beginning of the financial aid process that we need to make easier for students and families. So I'm glad to keep working with you, Mr. Chairman, to get this right. But while simplifying FAFSA is important, I don't have to tell anyone here that the COVID crisis is top of mind for students and families and educators. We just kicked off an unprecedented school year. There have already been over 88,000 cases of coronavirus on college campuses and 60 deaths. And these outbreaks have led many colleges to abruptly switch to remote classes and force students to leave campus with little warning. I'm hearing truly heartbreaking stories from college students back in my home state of Washington about the turmoil they are experiencing. So the Senate also needs to get to work negotiating a COVID relief package to make sure colleges can deliver a quality education for their students and implement public health protocols and provide emergency financial aid to students who are struggling to afford the food and housing and childcare and technology that they now need to have during this crisis. So I want you to know I'm going to keep pushing to start bipartisan negotiations on this relief package. But for now, I again want to thank our witnesses for being here, and thanks again to Chairman Alexander. I know we don't always agree, but what I do know is that even when we disagree, we've always been able to listen to each other and quite often find things we can agree on that help the people we're here to serve. That's what we've been able to do with the FAFSA simplification in the past, and I hope even in the few weeks you have remaining this year that we can build on that work to make much needed progress on the many critical challenges in front of us. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Senator Murray. Senator Baker told me one time that the key to being an effective senator was to become an eloquent listener.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So You do pretty well at that, and I try to as well. I welcome our witnesses today. Our first witness is Dr. Bridget Terry Long, the Dean and Sarris Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Dr. Long is an economist who focuses on the transition from high school to higher education and beyond. Her research examines the impact of factors such as affordability and academic preparation on college student outcomes. She was appointed to the National Board for Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education, where she served as vice chair and then chair. She holds a PhD and master's degree from the Harvard University Department of Economics, as well as bachelor's degree in economics from Princeton. Our second witness is Ms. Kim Cook, Executive Director of the National College Attainment Network. Ms. Cook has worked in the higher education and college access field for her entire professional career, including in undergraduate admissions and financial aid, and at a last dollar scholarship program, and as Executive Director of NCAN since 2008. She holds a master's degree in public administration from Pace University, bachelor's degree from American University. Our third witness is Ms. Rachel Feldman, Associate Provost and Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She served as Director of Financial Aid at the University of California, Berkeley. In this role, she developed and implemented a peer-led financial wellness initiative for undergraduate and graduate students. She also co-founded and co-led the University of California's system-wide Financial Aid Leadership Institute, developed and implemented UC Berkeley's Middle Class Access Plan. She currently serves in a leadership capacity on several financial aid advocacy boards. Our fourth witness is Dr. Judith Scott-Clayton, an Associate Professor of Economics and Education at Teachers College, Columbia University. She directs the Economics and Education program at Columbia. Dr. Scott-Clayton is also a Faculty Research Associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a Senior Research Scholar at the Community College Research Center. She holds a bachelor's degree from Wellesley and a PhD from Harvard. Our final witness, Kristen Holtquist, a founding partner of the consulting firm of HCM Strategies. She's helped steward and direct two recent initiatives, the American Dream 2.0 Coalition and the Doing Better for More Students Technical Report. Ms. Holtquist served as the U.S. Department of Education Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary of Education and the Program Director for Education Policy at the National Governors Association. She holds a bachelor's degree from California Polytechnic State University, a master's from Georgetown. I look forward to everyone's testimony. We thank you for being here. Let me please remind you to summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, if you will. And let's begin with Dr. Long. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman Alexander, Senator Murray, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you again today. My name is Dr. Bridget Terry Long, and as just noted, I am the Dean and Sarris Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I've spent over the last 2 decades researching issues related to post-secondary opportunity and student success, and my testimony today aims to provide information on the challenges students face in the financial aid system and highlight additional steps that could be taken to reform the FAFSA and improve the federal financial aid system. To begin, I must emphasize the importance of financial aid. There is a long, definitive research literature that proves financial aid not only has a positive impact on college enrollment, but also student persistence and degree completion. It is an effective approach for supporting college access and success. Today, the importance of financial aid is only growing, but a major impediment for many families, especially many low-income families, is the complexity of the college financial aid process. There continues to be a lack of information about the process of applying for and receiving financial aid, and the FAFSA process is difficult to navigate, and families are burdened with unnecessary questions that do little to nothing to further our estimates of their financial need. There's also confusion about how to renew financial aid. So as a result, students miss out on the support they are eligible to receive, which affects their enrollment decisions and limits college access. Additionally, lost or reduced financial aid undermines student persistence and degree completion. Overall, having a cumbersome, overly complex financial aid system undermines the effectiveness of our financial aid policies, not only federal, but also state and institutional aid programs, because the process and the FAFSA are unnecessarily complicated gatekeepers. Importantly, simplification is an important policy tool, a powerful policy tool. As I've shown in my own research, interventions that simplify the FAFSA for families have had meaningful positive impacts on college outcomes. In my work with Eric Bettinger, Phil Oriopoulos, and Lisa Sembumatsu, we found that streamlining and providing assistance with the FAFSA had a substantial positive impact on the likelihood of aid application and enrolling in college. And 3 years after that intervention, helping students with the FAFSA, we found that students were still persisting in college, and they were persisting at higher levels and had higher educational attainment than their counterparts who did not receive help with the FAFSA. In other words, they were able to succeed in college even though the barrier of the FAFSA process would have kept them out of school. I want to acknowledge that there have been improvements to the FAFSA in recent years, and those have been amazing. But while these steps have been important, these efforts do not fully address the needs of many students. In a study I recently completed with Eric Bettinger and Monica Lee, in which we conducted a randomized controlled trial with 15,000 students in 2017, we found that students still lacked awareness of financial aid eligibility, the FAFSA application procedures, and aid award rules. And this was even after having prior year early FAFSA and the IRS data retrieval tool. So our intervention, which focused on providing support and information, had a positive impact, which underscores the fact that without additional help and information, the current FAFSA process is still a barrier to getting students aid. And this point was further emphasized with what we just witnessed this past spring with FAFSA submission rates during COVID. As students lost access to their teachers, counselors, and nonprofit organizations who would normally help them, we saw submissions for the FAFSA fall. So yes, additional simplification is necessary, but much more is needed beyond just reducing the number of questions. First, I would underscore the necessity to improve the need analysis calculation that determines how much aid families should receive. We needed to reform it to more accurately reflect the financial situations of most college students today who are not going full-time and are financially dependent on their parents after immediately leaving high schools. We have working adults, parents, veterans who are not served as well by the way that we calculate how much aid they should receive. Second, regarding the FAFSA, we must proactively disseminate clear information and enable multiple pathways for families to complete the aid application process. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, now is the time when we need to bolster the aid that is available to students. We are at a critical moment of time facing a pandemic, recession, and numerous examples of racial injustice. While we usually see increases in college enrollment during recessions, this moment of time appears to be different in severity and scale. And according to a new poll, at least half of households in large cities have been affected by depleted savings, job loss, and difficulties affording basic needs. Without government intervention support, we are unlikely to see investments in the skills that will be necessary to take individuals, families in this country to the next stage of economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Ms. Cook, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Murray, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify on time to finish fixing the FAFSA. I'm particularly honored to offer this testimony as a former Pell Grant recipient myself. The National College Attainment Network, NCAN, and its over 500 affiliates work in communities across the country to close equity gaps in post-secondary attainment. As a nation, we've made progress over the past 20 years with more students pursuing higher education. But when we scratch the surface of the data, we find attainment gaps of over 20 percentage points persist by race and income. Much of that gap is fueled by an affordability challenge, with NCAN's growing gap research finding that only 25% of public four-year institutions are affordable to even those students who work hard to gather all of the federal and state aid for which they are eligible. FAFSA completion is the bare minimum to afford college. This one-two punch of inequity and lack of affordability, exacerbated by family income losses due to COVID, make today's conversation about FAFSA as the key to access that federal aid critical. The high school class of 2018 left nearly $2.6 billion on the table in unclaimed Pell dollars by not completing the FAFSA. Many students miss out on the Pell they deserve because the form is unduly complicated and often requires expert assistance to complete. Since our hearing 7 years ago, we've been improving the FAFSA through changes such as the use of prior year income to allow students to file the application to better align with their decision-making timeline, and the launch of a mobile app to reach students where they are. In the year following those changes, we saw a 9% increase in FAFSA completions for high school seniors and reversed a 4-year decline in overall applications. Prior year also increased the percentage of FAFSA filers who are Pell eligible, adding over 58,000 Pell eligible FAFSA filers. Clearly, simplification matters. The December passage of the Future Act will reduce up to 22 questions on the FAFSA by allowing for data sharing between the U.S. Department of Education and the Internal Revenue Service. While we celebrate the passage of this legislation, it's important to note that it faces a more complicated than anticipated road to implementation, which is currently not expected until the 23-24 FAFSA. We're now at an important inflection point to think about what's left to fix the FAFSA. NCAN sees 3 key steps remaining: remove unnecessary questions, simplify the Pell Grant eligibility formula, including fast-tracking eligibility for students receiving means-tested benefits, and streamline verification. I'd expand on these in my written testimony and would be happy to discuss more in the question and answer period. First, NCAN has long advocated to remove unnecessary questions. 25% of the questions on today's FAFSA are answered by less than 1% of applicants. In our 2017 research, Half the FAFSA, we developed and user-tested a streamlined FAFSA with dramatically fewer questions. We found that our simplified FAFSA improved completion time by 3%, and even more importantly, reduced the error rate by 56%. Second, we turn to the Pell Grant, the cornerstone of federal student aid for low-income students. NCAN advocates for a simplified Pell eligibility formula that ties adjusted gross income and family size to federal poverty levels. We also support a fast track to full Pell Grant eligibility to those receiving means-tested benefits, such as the SNAP program. While examining the Pell Grant, it's important to address the need to restore its purchasing power by doubling it. At its peak in 75-76, the maximum Pell Grant covered more than 3/4 of the average cost of attendance for a 4-year public university. Today, it covers less than 30%. NCAN's long-term investment proposal calls for a return to a Pell Grant that covers 50% of the cost of attendance for a public 4-year university. Our third and final component to fix FAFSA is to better target and significantly decrease verification selection rates. The student's FAFSA is not complete or actionable until this audit-like process is resolved, often causing missed deadlines and missed opportunities for first-come, first-served state and institutional aid. Earlier this year, NCAN worked with the Office of Federal Student Aid data to find that slightly more than 70% of students who completed verification experienced no change in their Pell Grant award, and that 93% of applicants with an Auto Zero EFC retained that award after verification. These data raise questions about both the costs and benefits of verification and how upcoming policy implementations could knock down this barrier. In closing, we thank you for having this important discussion today. Mr. Chairman, as you retire from the Senate, please let me take this opportunity to thank you for being a tireless champion for FAFSA simplification to help all of our students succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook, for your testimony and your nice comments. Ms. Feldman, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Alexander, Ranking Member Murray, and members of the committee for this opportunity to speak about simplifying the aid application process. As a person on a campus, I see every day how important this is. At Carolina, we're a public flagship university that prides itself on being truly public, and that includes making it affordable for anyone who earns their admission through their scholarship and hard work. More than 10% of our undergraduates participate in our Carolina Covenant program, which is a no loans promise for low-income students. 1/4 of our undergraduates receive Pell Grants, and nearly half receive some sort of need-based aid. This means Carolina provides significant funding to make college affordable to every student across the income spectrum. Therefore, we must stretch our precious taxpayer and donor dollars and direct funds where they're needed most. This means we need a FAFSA that works for our lowest income students, but also for middle income families that still need help to afford college, and also for those seeking federal loans to finance their education. On the campus, I see firsthand how students and families get discouraged by the complexity of the process. In difficult times like this pandemic, I really see the worry and frustration families have as they try to make it through all their paperwork. As you can imagine, our neediest students were among the hardest hit as they and their family members lost jobs, had to close small businesses, and students were uncertain of where to live and how to take their courses remotely. We want to be there to answer their questions and to provide them help and support, something we would have more time to do if we didn't have to explain a complicated application or follow up on missing tax transcripts. I applaud the Senate's efforts to make sure students can more easily make it through the process and concentrate on their education. As an aid office, we really want three things: an aid application that's easy for students to complete, a precise and meaningful measure of financial need, and to be empowered to serve individual students in unique situations. With the Future Act and further reform, we can get there. The direct share of IRS information is key. It means the FAFSA won't need to ask questions about things we already know. That will make more students likely to complete the process and attend college. And we can be assured of the quality and accuracy of the data we're receiving. So we should not need to subject so many families to verification, a roadblock for needy students, and frankly, a burden for schools as well. I hope you will enact, in fact, additional legislation that will leverage the expanded IRS data in the Future Act to further streamline the process. While schools like mine could use that expanded tax information right now for awarding our own funds, its value could be multiplied exponentially by using it in federal needs analysis. I have several specific thoughts on how this could make things easier and more equitable, which I outline in my written testimony and would be happy to comment on in question and answer. Also in my written testimony, you'll see I applaud many of the ideas in the FAFSA Simplification Act, particularly removing questions that are not related to finances and making the FAFSA easier for those in simple situations without sacrificing information for people with complex situations. I would love to see a FAFSA that not only simply and equitably helps us distribute Pell, but also contains enough information to eliminate any need for supplemental forms from states or from schools. As simple as we make the FAFSA, we also need to make sure it makes sense for all families, including those in the non-traditional situations many of my colleagues have mentioned. Aid can be confusing even beyond the FAFSA. We need time to dig into each student's situation and to use professional judgment to address unique challenges. Otherwise, the simplified formulas that work for the many may harm the few. The pandemic has proven this point. Without the flexibility to adjust aid for job losses and extra expenses, many students would have dropped out. But families face hardships all the time, not just during pandemics, and we want to help them all and use their true ability to pay to guide that help. I hope that once the Future Act and further legislation helps us simplify the FAFSA, students, parents, and aid officers can all spend less time navigating forms, fixing errors, and submitting and reviewing tax forms for verification. Instead, I hope students and families have more time for learning and living, and I hope aid officers have more time to counsel families, encourage financial literacy, help students facing emergency, and address special circumstances. Our goal should be to help students not only with access, but to successful graduation. Once again, let me thank you for the steps we have already taken with the Future Act and the excellent proposals to make things easier and simpler for all families. As an aid officer, I hope you will create a simple but meaningful process that allows professionals like me to concentrate on helping students and making their dream of attaining a college degree come true. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Feldman. Dr. Scott-Clayton, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Alexander, Ranking Member Murray, and members of the committee. It is a true honor to be here in front of you again, this time virtually. Obviously, a lot has changed since we first testified in 2013, and especially during these past 6 months. So the first thing I'd like to address is why FAFSA simplification still matters in the context of everything else that is going on right now. To put it simply, FAFSA simplification still matters because college access still matters, and perhaps now more so than ever. We know that the burdens of this pandemic, from unemployment to food and housing insecurity to increased exposure to illness and death, are falling hardest on low-income families and communities of color. In addition, low-income college students may lack adequate computer technology and Wi-Fi to support online classes. And the public institutions that they are most likely to attend are facing drastic cuts in state and local funding. With a full recovery not expected for perhaps a decade, much is uncertain about the future. But the one thing that we can count on is that without large and sustained federal efforts to support low-income students at all levels of education, educational inequality is likely to explode in the coming years. And if we don't take every step that we can to address this now, we'll be addressing the fallout for generations. When it comes to inequality in college access, fixing the FAFSA can be a meaningful part of the solution. We know from decades of rigorous research that when students get financial aid, it increases enrollment, helps students graduate, and can lead to higher earnings and higher rates of homeownership after college. Unfortunately, as my collaborator, Dr. Susan Donarski, and I wrote when we first began studying this issue, the federal student aid programs hide their substantial benefits behind a tangled thicket of bureaucracy embodied in the FAFSA application process. For many families, filling out a FAFSA is more complicated than an income tax form, and it's something that they have less experience with. Too many eligible students or prospective students have simply never heard of it and have no idea it could provide them with up to over $38,000 in Pell Grant support over the course of their degree. Others try to file but get stuck along the way, including in the cumbersome verification process. Some don't realize that they have to reapply every year. And still others are shut out due to the FAFSA's unnecessary and counterproductive question 23 about prior drug convictions. Like a woman I met just this month when we were on a panel together speaking about college access to members of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. This complexity undermines our investment in student aid by making it harder to reach the very students that need it most. And this is not just speculation, as Dr. Long just talked about. One of the studies that she mentioned that she was a co-author on showed that just helping families fill out and submit the FAFSA increased college enrollment by 8 percentage points. That's huge. Yet millions of students fail to file each year, losing out on an estimated $24 billion in aid annually. And right now, during the pandemic, the FAFSA is just one more baffling frustration for students and families to navigate when so much of their energy is consumed just trying to survive. And most frustrating of all is that it does not have to be this way. Most of the questions on the FAFSA are not even necessary to accurately target federal student aid. Simulations show that Pell eligibility can be accurately predicted using only a few key items like income and family size. We could get rid of what we think of as the FAFSA completely, and here's what that could look like. First, base Pell Grants on a limited number of elements that are already available from the IRS so that no separate financial application would even be needed. Second, we could continue to provide an index of eligibility that states and institutions can use for their own purposes. Third, fix eligibility for several years so that students can plan a multi-year course of study without needing to reapply. Fourth, summarize Pell eligibility by income in a simple lookup table. And finally, use IRS information to proactively communicate to prospective students and their families about likely Pell eligibility. Since 2013, substantial progress has been made towards simplification, thanks to the hard work of members of this committee. The Future Act will reduce the hassle even further and minimize the need for verification. But concerningly, FAFSA applications are actually down since the committee took up this issue in 2013, and they're down the most among low-income students and independent students. Without further action, the FAFSA will still be the FAFSA and will still be a barrier for low-income students. Of course, this isn't the only action that we need to address persistent and growing inequality in education. But right now, we can't afford not to take every opportunity that we have to help low-income students who need our support now more than ever. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Scott-Clayton. Our final witness is Ms. Holtquist. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning, Senator Alexander, Senator Murray, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. I am Kristen Holtquist, and I come before you as a lifelong higher education analyst, a former senior advisor in the U.S. Department of Education, and a last witness to the coalesced interests in support of the FAFSA Simplification Act. 525,600 minutes. Sing the artists performing Seasons of Love in the Tony Award-winning play Rent. They ask, how do you measure a year? I ask, how do you measure the time it takes to coalesce the voices for the FAFSA Simplification Act? It's been 24 years since President Clinton introduced with his budget the concept of using prior year income provided through tax returns. 4,362 days since Secretary Margaret Spellings first waived the 10-page FAFSA when rolling out the Bush administration's call for FAFSA simplification. 68,102 hours since the New York Times covered HCM strategist release of our American Dream 2.0 report on simplifying student aid. This is a bipartisan report signed by civil rights leaders, a sitting governor, the president of the nation's largest historically Black college university system, the former head of the Congressional Budget Office, employers, and Ms. Cook. 3.6 million minutes since we four sat before you to demonstrate our shared conviction that fewer questions asked of students could yield approximately the same determination of need. States agree we must finish fixing the FAFSA now. SHIO, MHEC, WICHE, NASGAP, and NEBI, SREB, an alphabet soup for sure of state-based educational leadership organizations, unite on this. Tennessee's experience shows us why they do. Tennessee has implemented multiple layers of staffing and infrastructure to achieve its best-in-the-nation FAFSA completion status. Every school counselor gets a FAFSA kit. This leads to a FAFSA frenzy day across the state. No joke, that is a real thing. Finally, students receive individual reminders throughout the application period, urging them to complete their form and connecting them to call centers for support. Institutions agree we must fix the FAFSA now. NASFA supports this bill. I see the consequences of not having a simplified needs analysis for Pell in my role as a trustee of one of our nation's Hispanic serving institutions, Metro State University, Denver. We are the opportunity generator in Colorado. Blacks and Latinos comprise half of our student body. 1/3 of our full-time students qualify for the maximum Pell Grant. The hard work of racial justice on our campus needs a simplified Pell formula. And for Denver's 130,000 unemployed, with a Pell lookup table, MSU Denver can partner with our state's unemployment insurance program to reach these adults that need reskilling and upskilling. Advocates for students coalesce around other changes in the FAFSA Simplification Act. As Vice Chair of the Institute for Higher Education Policy, I join the voices of nearly 40 national faith, justice reform, business, corrections, and higher education organizations calling for removal of Question 23, prohibiting students from prior drug-related offense from getting aid. I sit before you not just as one to remind you of the consensus achieved, but as a former Department of Education advisor, one who knows that delaying now to adopt the FAFSA Simplification Act is wasteful and inefficient. Federal student aid today is incorporating necessary upgrades to the Future Act. Changes in the FAFSA do not happen quickly because of back-end systems, but we have the opportunity to do the full renovation once. Future FAFSA filers will authorize the IRS to share data, and then no additional financial information will be needed. My mom raised me to never quit a race 9/10 from finishing. A former 400-meter hurdler, I know that is one hurdle from the tape. As a first-generation Pell graduate, as the mother of a daughter who just started college this fall, as the financial supporter of Cornerstone Christian School, where every one of our students will be first-gen and needs us to finish the job we started 24 years ago, I implore you, don't quit now. We have 53 questions, one hurdle to go to finish this race. We can and must measure the impact of consensus achieved in more than time elapsed. Millions more Americans will access financial aid they need to improve their lives if you pass now the FAFSA Simplification Act. Thank you. I welcome your questions.
Well, thank you very much to our witnesses. A compelling testimony, and we'll now begin a series of questions from senators, limited to five minutes each. Listening to all of you, especially the numbers that Ms. Holtquist mentioned, takes me back 7 years to the testimony when 4 of the witnesses who are here today, when I asked them, I said, well, could you each write us a letter about what we need to do to simplify the FAFSA? And they turned around and looked at each other and said, we don't need to each write you a letter. We all agree on what needs to be done. And so they wrote us one letter, and that was 7 years ago. And it sounds like today, it seems even more urgent to do it now. Sometimes in the Senate, we get in a position of saying, well, let's wait till we agree on everything to do anything. This is a very significant thing that we're talking about. I mean, just to go back to where I started, this is the FAFSA. This is 108 questions that in the middle of the pandemic, 20 million families are expected to fill out in order to get their free education in Tennessee for 2 years, or any Pell Grant or any student loan. 20 million families filling it out every year. And what our witnesses have told us is that there are 53 questions on that list that we don't need. And there's really not any disagreement about that. I guess there's someone somewhere who disagrees about that, but I haven't met them. I rarely have met any issue about which there's much more compelling agreement than this. So this would be the new FAFSA, minus 53 questions that our witnesses say is unnecessary. Now let me talk about a technical matter. The law that Senator Murray and I introduced last year that took the 22 questions and said that we're on the FAFSA, that are on the FAFSA, and with one click, a student applicant and family can ask the IRS to answer that question for them. That's a big step forward. And the 53 we're talking about are in addition to that. But it will take a while to implement the law we passed last year, and we're told it may be the year 23-24. Well, my question, and let me ask Ms. Holtquist and Ms. Cook to start with this question, wouldn't it make sense to go ahead and pass this legislation, removing the 53 questions, so that it can be implemented at the same time the law we passed last year is, so that the new simplified FAFSA could be introduced all at once to 20 million families in the same year, 23-24? How much difference would that make? Ms. Holtquist.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to start by echoing Senator Murray's commendation of you. On behalf of all first-generation students, we owe you a debt of gratitude. From a student perspective, no doubt, the FAFSA Simplification Act finishes the job. It only asks the questions we need and no more for states and for institutions. Now, from a taxpayer and U.S. Department of Education perspective, I believe you measure twice and cut once. We're going to have one back office system upgrade. It's going to be more secure because we're going to be transferring data from the IRS to the Department of Education. But we are not linking up our data elements. So the current law uses data elements from tax forms that no longer exist. The Tax Cuts and Job Act got rid of the 1040A and 1040EZ. So currently the Department of Education is using Schedule 1 as a proxy for these. But the Future Act doesn't recognize Schedule 1. So what you have is one model not talking to the old model. Let's clean up the legislation so that our statutory formula for Student Affordability Index, by EFC, would actually be able to be sufficient. And so individuals don't have to wonder, did I fill out a Schedule 1? Just like right now, they don't know what's a 1040A, what's an EZ.
I'm going to run out of time here, and I'm going to run out of time in a minute. Let me, if I may, move on to Ms. Cook and ask her the same question. Wouldn't it make sense to go ahead and pass this law this year, getting rid of the 53 questions so that it could be implemented at the same time of the Future Act that Senator Murray and I sponsored?
Mr. Chairman, NCAN is fortunate to help serve and advise on the implementation of the Future Act, and we've seen, as you understand well, from your time, that the sausage-making process is difficult. I would say, to the extent that we can make these sweeping changes once, I'm sure that would be helpful, and I would be hopeful that we would be able to integrate them all into a 23-24 FAFSA.
Dr. Scott-Clayton, do you have anything to add?
I simply agree with the prior statements. I absolutely think, get it done once to make it efficient.
My time is up. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Feldman, let me ask you, in overseeing federal financial aid at UNC Chapel Hill, you see firsthand how FAFSA is just one part of a complicated financial aid and enrollment process. Unfortunately, families face a lot of barriers in getting access to the support they need to afford higher education. And your own campus has seen the tumultuous impact of trying to make this process work during a pandemic. As a former Pell Grant recipient myself, I know how forms and eligibility rules create hurdles and headaches for families. And unfortunately, these barriers have only gotten worse, with students and families now facing more rules, more forms to get into college, get financial aid, and maintain that support. So I wanted to ask you, besides completing the FAFSA, what are the biggest hurdles students and families face in getting access to the financial aid that they need?
Thank you, Senator Murray. That's a fabulous question, and there certainly are more hurdles than simply the FAFSA alone. I think we've mentioned several of them, in particular the verification process, which is like an audit of what they have already filled out on the form. But in fact, students are verified on their financial aid application at much higher rates than we audit people on their tax returns, which is a little confusing. In addition, if I can be naive and frank, students just need more money. Students need higher Pell Grants, and students need higher thresholds for that Pell Grants, and maybe this decoupling of the Pell Grant eligibility from our complicated EFC formula gives us a chance to address that issue. And finally, we need to make sure, as I said earlier, that whatever we do to simplify those formulas for the index isn't so simple that schools like ours decide that students need to fill out the CSS profile or other supplemental forms, which are even more complicated than the FAFSA today.
Okay, thank you. While it's critical, we know the FAFSA is just the front end of the process that students go through to get the help they need to afford college. There's a lot more we can do or should be doing to make sure our students have the support they need to afford food and housing and childcare. And as the economic devastation of this pandemic is continuing, many students and families, particularly students and families of color, are now experiencing unemployment and are really struggling to make ends meet. And those financial pressures threaten to exacerbate existing racial disparities regarding access to higher education. So to any of our witnesses who'd like to answer, let me just start with Ms. Cook and then Ms. Feldman. How can the Department of Education, states, and colleges use the FAFSA and financial aid process to connect students to other federal programs like SNAP or TANF or Medicaid and help make sure they can meet their basic needs while going to school?
Senator, our experience is that many of our students have overlapping eligibility for Pell Grant, for SNAP, for TANF, for example. We see some opportunities, perhaps in loan counseling, to flag those students and share those eligibility that they may not be aware of. I also think we have some promise in the proposed simplified Pell Grant eligibility index. Since that is tied to federal poverty level, it could give us a chance to crosswalk other means-tested benefits programs that are also tied to federal poverty level.
Okay, good. Ms. Feldman?
Thank you. I agree with the statements of Ms. Cook, especially about the federal poverty level. I also believe that we need to make sure that whatever measures we are using accommodate non-traditional situations, such as the students who live with their grandparents. The students aren't even sure which are the parents they should be putting on the form, and our independent students returning to school, which make up more and more of our populations.
Okay. I just have a minute left, but I wanted to ask Dr. Long and Dr. Scott-Clayton, you've both written about the benefits of predictability for financial aid. What should we as policymakers do to make sure students know their options, including those offered by their college financial aid administrators, should they need their aid adjusted because of financial hardship that we're seeing now because of the pandemic and other conditions?
Thank you, Senator Murray. Just to say, we need to move out of these acronyms that we use like EFC. We've seen lots of research as other colleges and universities have moved just to income thresholds that families understand or parents understand much better. I think this also builds on your previous question where we know about other aid programs and using crosswalks between them. If you are already qualifying for food stamps or other kinds of assistance, communicating that to students, same as if you were qualifying for financial aid, having that to go back and notifying students. We've seen this work in the past very effectively in increasing access to support.
Okay, thank you. And I know I'm out of time, so maybe if some of the others can give me a written response, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I mean, it's like such a no-brainer. You've convinced me over the last 4 or 5 years we've worked together as to the wisdom of this, and some of these witnesses whom we've heard before. Similarly, by the way, my wife's a general surgeon. She was filling out FAFSA, and like she threw up her hands in the air. She's like, I can't do this. And so think if your first language is not English, how would you accomplish it? And so it really gives me sympathy. With that said, I'm going to actually open up speaking about something which is not directly on point, but I'd at least like to make the point. Ms. Holtquist, it's not only important that somebody be able to access the financial means to go, but I personally think that it's important that they have the student level data. As I tell folks, if you look in a mirror, what does someone who looks like you going to do in this curriculum at this university? Senator Warren and I have a bill, College Transparency Act, that would request this to be published so that someone can say, I look like this, what am I going to do in this curriculum at this school? Do you have any comments on that? You're on mute. You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Senator, for the tip and also for your question, for your leadership in sponsoring with Senator Warren the College Transparency Act. Currently, students must make choices about where to attend college, what to study, or how to pay for it based on woefully inadequate information. This is because our national data systems are incomplete, they're inconsistent, they're duplicative, and they're burdensome. So a student-level data network like the one you've proposed would fix this. It provides students with quality information on institution and program-level outcomes to inform their choices. It also will give policymakers better information to drive evidence-based decisions, which is very critical in a time like this when resources are scarce.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for, and frankly, I'm going to ask you to be called as a witness if we ever have a hearing on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Feldman, your testimony stated that you hope that aid administrators will be given guardrails to ensure program integrity, such as the ability to use professional judgment to reduce a Pell Grant if the AGI does not appear to reflect the student's true ability to pay. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think that's, we're trying to get help to people, and sometimes it gets just, kind of tied in a knot. And I think you want to untie it. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Absolutely. Certainly our overall goal is to make things as simple and straightforward as possible for the majority of families. But I can tell you a story about a family that I had a few years ago. The student applied for aid. They were selected for verification. The mother's AGI was $20,000, $4,000 from earned work, and $16,000 from interest income. As we dug in, that woman was a lawyer who owned her own firm and worked out of her home. And her income was actually much closer to $300,000. But she had a lot of paper write-offs as she depreciated her home, her car, and wrote off a lot of other things as her personal expenses. it feels like it's not a good use of taxpayer money to give that student a full Pell Grant when there are so many in true need, rather than those who are able to quite legally use the tax system to write down their income with these non-financial paper expenses that don't really affect their true ability to pay. I think using that would be rare, but in some cases, particularly for institutional and state aid, it can be very important.
Well, I'll tell you, Ms. Feldman, one of the things we always have to push back on is a lack of accountability, and I think you're asking for administrator level accountability. So thank you for treating the taxpayers' money like it's your own money. Let me ask you one more question. Tell me, UNC, how has the pandemic affected students' ability to pay, those who may have lost jobs, et cetera? Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, the pandemic's really been devastating, particularly for our lowest income students. And with our switch to remote learning, many of them needed help just getting hooked up to broadband internet so that they were able to study. Students needed a desk to study at. Maybe they shared a room at home with 3 of their siblings. Thank goodness we had the CARES Act to help us with emergency aid, but our resources are dwindling, and I worry about what we'll do next year when we are facing a huge increase in students who are coming to us for reconsideration because their parents have lost jobs, they can't find part-time work, and they're so uncertain about the future. We would really appreciate some support.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much. I wanted to start by saying that I think I speak for a lot of members of the committee when I say that most of us would incorporate by reference what both you and Senator Murray said about each other. So we want that on the record. But let me start with the circumstance we face with the worst public health crisis in a century, the COVID-19 pandemic. That pandemic, we know, has created all kinds of disruptions. And in the education system, those disruptions range from childcare through post-secondary education and so many other disruptions in between. And at the same time, there's been a jobs crisis that has flowed in the wake of the pandemic. We know that post-secondary education will be a critical component to any economic recovery. And unfortunately for many students, the pandemic has not only created financial strain, but it has exacerbated other barriers to post-secondary education, such as access to technology, access to transportation, and even access to affordable, high-quality childcare. We heard testimony this past March as well as today that only 45% of low-income students complete the FAFSA, missing out on some $24 billion in grants and loans and institutional aid each year. So to ensure that any student with financial need is able to obtain assistance, it's clear we must make the form and verification process simpler. I think we all agree on that. But I have to say, without further reforms to the Higher Education Act and significant investments in childcare, elementary and secondary education, higher education, state and local funding, and so many other investments we should be making, post-secondary access and success will unfortunately remain out of reach for many Americans. I'll start with Associate Provost Feldman for this question. Many college financial aid offices, because of the pandemic, had to cancel in-person counseling and training events, and many college access organizations transitioned to virtual operations. Supporting students solely online or by phone as they navigate these complex forms is indeed challenging. And for many low-income and rural students, a lack of access to technology or reliable high-speed internet can make it nearly impossible. According to the Pew Research Center, 30% of low-income households with school-age children lack reliable internet at home. My fundamental question is this: what can the Department of Education and institutions of higher education do to better support these students in applying for financial aid without the in-person assistance?
Thank you, Senator Casey. That is indeed a challenging question. Here in North Carolina, we are certainly a state that has broadband deserts in our rural counties in places. We, in fact, as we moved to remote instruction, gave students supplements very particularly to try to purchase broadband access. But in some cases, students chose to stay and live in an apartment in Chapel Hill rather than go home because no matter how much money we threw at them, there simply wasn't the access available and they couldn't be successful. On the other hand, students have been very resilient at using things like Zoom or this WebEx product we're using now, or their phone to apply for aid and ask for help. And we've been able to help them much more carefully and strongly than we thought. I think if there's anything the department can do, again, to provide funding for students who need it, to help enhance their access to technology in their schools or in their homes or both, it would be key to them successfully transitioning to college this coming year.
And before I close, I just want to ask any other member of the panel if they wanted to comment on this question about what the department can do.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I would just briefly say we want students and families to be focusing their time on their academic preparation, and we know they have to focus now on many other needs. The more that we can do in proactively pushing out information. So for families who have already established that they're struggling and that they're poor, why make them go through the form? Why are we not doing outreach? And so these recommendations to base things off of poverty levels and qualification for other programs, we can be much more proactive in meeting families where they are in their needs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Casey. Senator Murkowski.
Okay, you can hear me, you can see me now, right? Kind of.
I can hear you. I can't see you. Now I can
All
see
right.
you. Senator Murkowski, we can see
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Alexander, and thank you to those who have gathered to talk about these important issues for our students and what we can do to ease the process for them. Several of you have noted the importance of decoupling the Pell Grant need analysis from federal student loan to ensure that our middle schoolers, our high school students will know that they've got the money then to go into college. We recognize, though, that the FAFSA Simplification Act does not provide a promise that students will be eligible for a Pell Grant because we know that circumstances can change, families' incomes may change, and there's been that discussion this morning. The early awareness chart idea, I assume, is intended to let the students know that college may be an option if the income levels stay the same. But I'm afraid that message may get lost there. I'm concerned that families may believe that a chart showing a certain family income and family size equals a certain Pell Grant amount, and that's a promise, that's a guarantee. So how can the FAFSA Simplification Act avoid that misunderstanding? Have we thought through how we ensure in a clear way that this is conditioned on circumstances remaining the same? Is this a fear or concern that you have? And I throw that out to any member of the panel who may wish to speak to it.
I'll speak to that. Thank you, Senator. I do think that is a little bit of a concern, but you sort of have to weigh the relative concerns here. And right now, I think that the far larger concern is that students don't know or aren't preparing for college because they think they won't qualify. If we do have some students who are preparing and doing everything they can to get ready for college, and then at the end they get a surprise in the other direction, that's a concern, but I think there's still going to be other ways to help those students. For the long term, I think the ideal solution there is to think about taking that eligibility and basing it on a family's income as they're going along and preparing for college, so that it can really be a promise. When they get to that point, they know it's almost more like a savings account or a baby bond sort of idea, where by the time they get there, they know exactly what they have in the bank. And I think that FAFSA simplification is a step that will move us in that direction.
So we're not quite there yet, but we're laying the groundwork for what you have perhaps outlined.
I think this is a huge step. I think this would be a huge step. The legislation that's on the agenda today, I think, will be a major step. And like I said, I'm way more worried about students not preparing for college because they think they won't qualify. Yeah. And we know that there's a lot of persistence to family income over time. We saw that in the conversation about the prior year switch. There's a lot of persistence in eligibility over time. So that's not the biggest of my concerns right now. And I think it will open the door to even greater reforms in the future.
Anybody else want to speak to that quickly? I've got one more question that I'd like to ask.
Sure. If I could just interject just briefly. I do have some research on this area. In this area, when we were focusing on 28,000 students in Ohio and North Carolina, we also ended up having a small experiment where we shared with their younger siblings and with the sophomores and freshmen in their schools the kind of postcard that we're talking about right now, with a pre-estimate of financial aid. What we actually found is that the families all became interested in all of a sudden meeting with their guidance counselors, meeting with the nonprofits that were available to start a conversation. It grabbed their attention so that they were coming in to get the advising, not just about financial aid, but also about college choice and program of study, which is also a very important part of the process. So we really interpreted it as starting the conversation, which is absolutely critical, given all the misinformation that's out there that there's no aid.
I appreciate that. Let me switch to a question that came from the University of Alaska, and this relates to the need for changes in the income verification process. From their perspective, this verification process has been, they've described it almost as a Pyrrhic victory. It's captured a minimum amount of fraud and abuse. She likened it to getting audited by the IRS every year and finding nothing every time. It's good that you find nothing, but it puts applicants through quite a process for what they feel is very small benefit to the department's federal student aid office. The FSA provided guidance that allowed for applicants to submit a signed copy of their 1040 for the academic year 2021. This was very, very helpful from previous guidance that had required an IRS return transcript. That was very burdensome for many of my constituents, particularly those that come from low-income households. So we saw previously that these applicants were more likely to be selected for verification, which ultimately led to less completed FAFSA applications. The guidance hasn't been extended yet for academic year 21-22. I guess the quick question and hopefully quick answer is whether or not a permanent change in the required documentation is necessary in your view.
Senator, I'll take that. Yes. So quick answer, yes, a permanent change to allow flexibility in the ways that students meet verification is a temporary fix. A longer term fix is to use the data that we've learned about this many times audited, few times changed, to really better target and lessen and perhaps get to the point where we can eliminate this back end process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our fourth annual hearing simplifying student aid applications, and by now I think all of us agree that this is a good idea. But 4 hearings? Since the Republicans took control of the Senate nearly 6 years ago, we have not had one single hearing in this committee on the student debt crisis. Instead of spending more time on how to make it easier for students to borrow more money, I think we ought to focus on how to deal with the $1.6 trillion in debt that is crushing millions of people. And I think that's particularly urgent because student loan debt is disproportionately a serious problem for Black and brown communities, especially as the COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis also disproportionately hits the same communities. I believe it's time to explore bold solutions like broad student debt cancellation. Congress should do that, but even if Congress doesn't cancel student loan debt, the President and Secretary of Education could do that right now. So, Dr. Scott-Clayton, just how bad is the student debt crisis for Black and brown families?
It's really shockingly bad. Even prior to the pandemic, nearly half of Black student loan borrowers would experience a student loan default within 12 years of college entry. That's compared to about a third of Hispanic borrowers and 1 in 5 white student borrowers. It's so bad that a Black college graduate with a bachelor's degree is more likely to experience a default than a white college dropout. And unfortunately, these stats might get worse due to the pandemic.
Right. And Dr. Long, what are the consequences of the student debt crisis for students who are still in school? Does debt have an impact on their completion?
Thank you, Senator Warren, for highlighting this issue. Yes, it's affecting not only attainment, but the quality of the experiences. The research shows lower GPAs, lower academic engagement, taking advantage of resources, reduction in course load, so attainment is being affected. And then these students, it affects their ability to save and to participate in asset building, so it has many negative consequences.
So, thank you. Just quickly, Dr. Scott-Clayton, I know you agree with me that simplifying the FAFSA form is a good idea, but do you also agree that student debt cancellation is the most efficient and effective solution to the crisis facing borrowers right now?
I do agree, given the urgency right now, we absolutely need to talk about student debt cancellation to address the crisis in student loans.
So thank you. I appreciate that. I request unanimous consent to submit into the hearing record a letter from the Harvard Law School Project on predatory student lending. It details the legal authority of the Secretary of Education to cancel student loans without congressional action. Millions of people are getting crushed by student loan debt, and that's why I have a bill to broadly cancel student loan debt as well. Mr. Chairman, do I have permission to enter this into the record?
So ordered, Senator Warren.
Thank you. You know, but even if Congress doesn't act, Leader Schumer and I introduced a resolution this morning calling on President Trump and Secretary DeVos to use the authority Congress has already given them to broadly cancel student loan debt now. It is time to get this done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Scott. Jones, Senator Jones. We'll go to Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me also echo what Senator Casey said. I so very much appreciate the comments that you have made about Senator Murray and Senator Murray's comments about you. And for those that may think that that we have a cynical Washington, D.C., I can assure folks that heard those comments that they are heartfelt. And as someone who has worked with both of you in a really close way, particularly on this issue with you, Senator Alexander, they are heartfelt and appreciated. And that's why it's been such a joy for me to work on this committee over the last 2.5 years. So I really appreciate everything that has been commented on today and your work together. I would have to say, Senator Alexander, I appreciate especially the work that we have been doing together on this really important issue. In Alabama, there are so many kids that just walk away from the FAFSA. I think in 2018, I saw statistics that close to 50% of our high school seniors just walked away from the FAFSA, leaving a lot of grant money on the table, not just scholarship, money for loans, but grant money and scholarships on the table. So one of the issues that we've seen with the implementation, with the bill that we passed with the Futures Act, it seems to be that the Department of Education is going to be pretty slow to implement this. And I'm not sure who is best to answer this, but I'm trying to figure out what you're hearing about why it is going to take so long. And let me say, I completely agree with Senator Alexander that if we could get our bill passed to do a complete overhaul and get them implemented at the same time, that is the ideal solution. given this pandemic, given the end of this Congress, it's going to be tough to get that done. So I'm assuming that we may end this Congress simply with what we've got, which was the Futures Act. Why is it taking so long, and what can we do, especially in Congress, to speed that up so it could be ready earlier? Anybody? I'll open up to anybody that might want to answer that.
Senator, I'll kick off here. What we are hearing is that there are complications in data security and in use of federal tax information. So concerns about how that information is and can be shared between the departments, and then with filers and even with family members who are part of an application. What Congress can do is clarify its intentions of how that information can and should be used, and help us certainly respect and care for data that we understand is sensitive, but to use it wisely.
Would anybody else like to share anything that they've heard, or just simply ask how important would it be for Congress to do whatever is necessary to get that implemented earlier, if at all possible?
Senator, thank you. This is Rachel. As a person at a school, we would certainly love to see the Future Act and any further simplification implemented as soon as possible. The longer it takes, the longer we have to help people through difficult forms, and the more risk we have that students don't complete the process, especially during this time of pandemic and extra needs. So we appreciate that support. It is hard to understand how all the sausage making at a very complex organization like Federal Student Aid works, but certainly the sooner the better.
I would just add to emphasize a sense of confusion about why it does need to take so long, and that some pressure may be necessary to speed that along, because I think it's a huge frustration to go through all the work of getting that legislation and then not have the urgency to get it implemented as soon as possible.
Well, thank you all. I have a lot of my questions have been answered. Let me just say again, we're going to continue to work on this. It is something that is really important to all these states. I may, following this hearing, get with Senator Murray and Senator Alexander to see what we could do to try to push that date up somehow, some way. Senator Collins, who is also in this committee, and I got a bill passed recently that would provide some extra security for the IRS by creating a voluntary program for a PIN number for the IRS that would create an extra level of security. Maybe we could work to try to help implement that through some of this somehow, some way, so we can give all parents and all those affected with this the level of comfort that they need for the security. So in this day and age, the United States government and people ought to be able to keep that information secure. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this work on this issue. Thank you for including me on this work and on this issue. I really very much appreciate that. I've enjoyed it very much. And thanks to all our witnesses for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Jones, and thanks for your leadership and sponsorship, both on the Future Act and on this legislation, reducing 53 questions from the FAFSA. Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you to all the witnesses for being there for our students, educating them and caring about them. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this committee in the United States Senate, for welcoming me here to both of them, and really appreciate that. We're going to miss your guidance. But moving on, I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Nevada. And so with so many students in Nevada across our country, of course, they're facing financial pressures due to the pandemic, COVID-19. So removing barriers, increasing access to needs-based programs, it's just critical. Unfortunately, low-income students, those in rural areas, first-generation students, they've long faced obstacles when applying for student aid. Since the start of the pandemic, the number of students completing FAFSA has decreased for Pell-eligible students, with the greatest decreases coming from families with incomes of $25,000 or less. Additionally, the students with the greatest barriers are also the students most likely to be required to complete a burdensome secondary income verification, which results in many eligible students missing out on that very important financial aid they need to reach their goals. And so, Ms. Feldman, what modifications to the family income verification process can be made, particularly to address the low-income students facing a changing education and financial landscape?
Thank you very much, Senator Rosen. I think the first thing to ask is why we verify so many families in the first place. The rate of verification has hovered around 30%. The department has talked about lowering it to 22%. These are much higher rates than we see on income tax verification, which are in the single digits. And we have not shown that it's necessary or effective, as most of the families we verify show little to no change in their ultimate eligibility, although many fail to complete it because it is difficult to obtain the forms they need. In addition, I think that research, as my colleagues have mentioned, has shown that verifying the lowest income families, those with means tested benefits or who qualify for auto zero EFC or expected family contribution, is particularly ineffective. And yet at schools, we continue to see those students selected over and over again. And those are the students who often have the most difficulty getting the forms they need to complete the process. So if I could make 2 recommendations, they would be very simple. Well, 3. 1, let's implement the Future Act so we don't have to ask them questions because we know already from their tax forms what their income is. 2, let's really look at the formula and select fewer people. And 3, let's not concentrate on the lowest income families, but more on the business owners or middle income families where we see actual change when we do verification.
Thank you. I want to just really quickly ask a question about our student vets and our dreamers. And of course, like you said, a lot of reasons people don't fill out FAFSA, a lot of barriers, a lot of confusion. A lot of our veterans don't realize they might be able to get FAFSA or get other student aid in addition to their GI benefits. We've got a lot of DACA recipients out there. And so we intentionally provided flexibility to determine how to distribute the funding. And so we have to be sure that we get it out there. So again, Ms. Feldman, I'm going to ask you as Director of Scholarships and Student Aid, how do you think we should be sure that our student vets, our DACA recipients, how can we be sure that they understand their eligibility, particularly those student vets, that they have more in addition to our GI, actually for all of them? And so what recommendations do you have there for Dreamers and student veterans?
Thank you. It's a little bit of a complicated question since particularly Dreamers have different eligibility depending what state they live in. I think it would be easier for everyone if we had some consistent eligibility for students who've been in the country since they were very small. For veterans, I would really like to see more outreach and more understanding for them that their veterans benefits often do not offset the other aid they're eligible for, or that they could save those benefits for graduate school if they used other aid to further their undergraduate career. And I should hope we could enlist the Department of Defense and the other veteran support services in helping us craft a message together with the Department of Education and schools that would let them know that it's worth their time to apply for aid.
Well, I thank you, and I look forward to working with you in the future on doing all of those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Hassan?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for having this hearing. And Mr. Chair, I just want to echo what you have heard from the witnesses and from our Ranking Member today. I want to thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your outreach to me as a new senator when I started in particular. We have had some candid exchanges, but we've always had productive ones, and that really speaks to your leadership. So thank you so much for everything you've done for so many. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today as well. And I want to start with a question to Ms. Cook and Ms. Feldman. In May, I sent a letter to Secretary DeVos with Senators Tim Scott, Loeffler, and Booker, urging the Department of Education to ensure that students who have been financially impacted by COVID-19 receive the financial aid that they are now eligible for. While the administration has since clarified that financial aid administrators may use what is known as professional judgment to adjust students' financial aid eligibility if their financial situation or employment status has changed, the department has continued to count unemployment benefits toward a student's earned income calculation, something that simply doesn't make sense given the uncertain duration of the benefits and the economic disruption that the need for the benefits represent. The Department of Education has also failed to conduct any outreach to recently unemployed individuals about their higher education options, which the Obama administration did during the last economic recession, or committed to changing the online FAFSA form to capture students with recent financial changes. We need to do more for our current and future students. So Ms. Cook and Ms. Feldman, what are your recommendations for how Congress and the Department of Education can address the challenges that students are facing while navigating their changing financial circumstances? And we'll start with you, Ms. Cook.
Thank you for this question and for your attention to a rapidly changing situation. Many of our students, unfortunately, do find themselves or family members with changes in employment, catastrophic healthcare bills, and unfortunately, in some situations, the death of a parent. This is a lot to manage and certainly triggers for professional judgment. We appreciate the flexibility that has been put in place so far, but agree with you that more can be done to better support our students, particularly those with unemployment. I'll yield some time to Ms. Feldman, too.
Thank you. Ms. Feldman?
Thank you. I think you've made some excellent points, and it would certainly help students and aid administrators to have a lot of clarity about the flexibility we're allowed in professional judgment, including not counting temporary means of support such as unemployment benefits. I think you'll see in my written testimony that I call on you as members of Congress to codify into law the provisions that were made in the 2009 Dear Colleague letter, which allowed for both of those provisions and protected schools from getting professional program reviews from the Department of Education based on the number of professional judgments done during a pandemic or other crisis such as this one.
Thank you very much for those responses. Ms. Holtquist, I have a question for you as well. The COVID-19 pandemic has devastated businesses across New Hampshire and across the country and put a record number of people out of work. I've heard from many constituents who are struggling to find work in their chosen field and who need access to upskilling and retraining programs. In August, Senator Young and I introduced the Bipartisan Upskilling and Retraining Assistance Act, which would help expand educational assistance programs for employers who hire and retrain workers. We need to provide robust support to workers and businesses who are adapting during and after this pandemic, and institutions of higher education play a significant role in this effort. Ms. Holtquist, with this shift in workforce and business needs, can you speak to the role of higher education in economic recovery and to how employers and industry leaders may partner with higher education on some of these initiatives?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, for your question. I will say that higher education is absolutely critical to economic recovery. It is, in fact, one of the benefits of the FAFSA Simplification Act that we'll be able to directly go to the virtual job fairs over time, of course, with the Pell Lookup Table. When you look at certain communities around the country, let's take in San Diego, impressive partnerships between higher education, the Workforce Development Council, and employers to create real clear pathways to the adults. They reach them when they're unemployed. They let them know. They actually combine with an income share agreement that says, if you finish this program that's in high need in our San Diego County, you won't have to pay for your education. And so if you have an income below a certain level. So we really need to combine these simple messages with the partnerships you describe and very much use our labor market data to train people for the jobs that are still growing.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. That will complete our questions from senators, but let me go to Senator Murray and see if she has any closing remarks or additional questions.
I don't have any additional questions, but let me just thank the witnesses for joining us today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you again to you for all the work you've done to simplify the FAFSA. As I said earlier, it is really largely thanks to your leadership that we've taken great strides in making FAFSA easier to navigate for many students across the country. but it's still clear we have a lot more to do, especially to make sure that our most at-risk students can easily access the Pell Grants that are available to them. We've got to make sure the financial aid process is easier for these students by making the verification process less of a burden, determining Pell Grants based on the federal poverty level so more students and families can easily know the amount of help they're going to receive, and fully implementing the Future Act. And we absolutely have to address what's top of mind for so many higher education students and their families, and that, of course, is the COVID crisis. Mr. Chairman, I am very proud of the successful bipartisan work that we have done on FAFSA simplification in the past. I hope in the coming weeks we can continue in that vein to address the critical challenges in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murray. And once again, thanks to you and your staff for making this hearing possible and making it easy. And I agree that I look forward to continuing to work over the next few weeks to see if we can finish the job. I have two comments to make, and then I'll conclude the hearing. One is Senator Warren mentioned that we hadn't had any hearings on student debt. Well, that's wrong. We've had 5, and on student college costs, student loans, student debt, student loan repayment options on March 27th, 2014, May 28, 2015, June 2015, January 2018, February 2018. Those were all bipartisan hearings. We had good, robust discussion. Obviously, there's lots of discussion that we can have among ourselves on access to college and student debt, the cost of college, student loan repayment. Those are all very important issues, and I'm sure that the Congress will continue to deal with them. Now, we have not agreed on exactly how to deal with all those issues, as well as some other ones, such as accountability in higher education. We have substantial agreement, but it looks like we're not going to have a bill, a broad bill reauthorizing higher education this year. But it seems to me that that's not a good reason not to finish the job on FAFSA simplification. In the first place, we're talking about a lot of Americans when we talk about FAFSA. We're talking about 20 million families, a disproportionate number of them low-income families, minority families, for whom federal aid is designed to help them have a ticket to a better life and a higher income to higher education. And anytime we can do something that important that helps 20 million of the most deserving families in the country, and we have substantial agreement on it, we should do it. Second, we do have substantial agreement on it. As I pointed out, Senator Murray and I have worked with the Obama administration and the Trump administration, and we've passed a law last year that would take significant steps to simplify the FAFSA. But for the last 7 years, most of the witnesses who are here today have told us what else we need to do, and that's to take the 108 questions and get rid of 53 questions and come up with something about this size. So why would we deliberately require 20 million lower income families in America to continue to fill out 53 questions they don't need to fill out, according to all the witness testimony that we've had at all our hearings? Why would we insist that they continue to do that when we could finish the job and pass the bill that we have before us? That's one. Second, we have the pandemic, and for the people who the witnesses, Senator Murray and others have mentioned, are especially in need of help, who may live with their grandparents, not be able to identify their parents, homeless people, foster children. We, through this legislation, can allow them to apply as independent students and make it much easier for them to access the FAFSA. The Congressional Budget Office says if we act, 420,000 more students will apply for Pell Grants. I know that in our state of Tennessee, which fills out the FAFSA more than any other state, lots of students will be able to have 2 years of free college education. And then we've got the practical consideration that the Futures Act that Senator Murray and I sponsored is now law, and the Treasury Department and the Department of Education are finding ways to implement it, and it would make much more sense and be much easier if we could pass this bill, removing the 53 additional questions, and let both the Future Act and this legislation be implemented at the same time. So at some point in the Senate, what we usually do is say, okay, we've talked about something enough. We've got as much advice as we need. There's really nothing much more we need to do to finish this job. It's an important job for the country. There's bipartisan support, no real opposition to it, so let's do it. So it's my great hope that Senator Murray, I, and this committee can work together in the next few weeks to do as we have often done, and that is to finish the job, simplify the FAFSA, and make it easier for 20 million families to have, especially low-income families, especially during this pandemic, to have access to higher education. The hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Members may submit additional information for the record within that time if they would like. I want to thank our witnesses today. You are real experts on this subject. You spend your life in dealing with students and their families and helping them have access to college. And as you have for the last 7 years, you have near unanimous agreement on what we need to do. So I hope we'll be wise enough to take your advice and do it. Thank you for being a part of our hearing today. Our committee will meet again on Wednesday, September 23rd at 10 a.m. for a hearing entitled COVID-19, an update on the federal response. We'll hear from Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Robert Redfield, Admiral Brett Giroir, and Dr. Stephen Hahn. Thank you for